Okay, I'm in the Studio B, as it were. So let me know if you can hear me, and I presume you can see me okay, but let me know if there's any issues. I try to double, triple, double, treble check everything, but you never know. Hey, Terrence. Hey, Ian. If you may have noticed this, if you're on Reddit at all, that there's a bit of a crisis in the community at the moment. I thought I'd touch on it just because I often go to Reddit. And I'm wondering what to do in the future with going to Reddit, how that's going to work. What's happening is this seems to have a lot of services. Twitter, I think, went through this. I don't know how it ended up solving itself. I think what ends up happening basically is Reddit historically, it's got data API endpoints you could read and do whatever with. And now they've decided that they're going to charge for API access, and this is causing quite the crisis for all kinds of tools and bots and alternative interfaces, I guess, alternative ways of getting your Reddit feeds. And there are a lot of subreddits. A lot of the ones that I've gone to have at least been discussing doing some kind of Reddit blackout for a few days. Oh, Terrence, you got thrown in Twitter jail? Hey, no, sorry. A few days because of it. Now, as people have pointed out, and I'm not here to take sides on it, really. Some people have pointed out that, listen, a lot of these apps were essentially just kind of feeding off of Reddit for free and doing things like taking off the ads that Reddit might serve you natively. And those, ads, hey, we all hate ads, but they have a purpose, right? And YouTube, which is where most of you guys end up watching me, has ads which allow them to keep the help pay for them, and I'll help and then actually funnels back something to me. So ads aren't all bad, and Reddit having its own servers and everything else, ads help to pay for all that, pay for all the folks who work for Reddit, blah 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 blah. So if you have a third party app that comes in and then finds a way to basically not put in Reddit's ads and do all that stuff, as you as an end user might think, great, I'm not getting ads, that's awesome, but you're potentially costing money. Maybe it's needed. I don't know. I don't know Reddit's books, but it's not always a great, not always a great thing. On top of it, I think that I heard, because I don't use any of the apps, I heard that some of them actually have their own subscription services, and they basically take out Reddit's ads and put their own ads in. It's complicated. I don't know where I stand on that. I don't use those apps. I don't really care about that. But it's bigger than these apps, because whereas you might not feel bad for someone who decided to, as someone pointed out, create their own business by basically building it on top of somebody else's business. So what happens when the underlying business changes? You've built this whole thing on top of it, and you're kind of screwed. But whose fault is it but your own, because you put all your eggs in someone else's basket, if you will. So whatever, right? That's fine. But the other part of it is a lot of the bots and accessibility tools that folks use to access Reddit are also under threat. It's not just, Apollo, or I forget some of the names. Reddit is Fun, I think, is another one. Apps. It's not just those guys who maybe you think, yeah, it's just capitalism and one company is battling at whatever. Okay, yeah, it's all in the market, blah, blah, blah. But then there are all kinds of helpful bots and services and accessibility tools, which is maybe the big one, the accessibility tools, folks who may have issues or not be able to access Reddit just through their normal web browser, able to use different tools to get them access. Those things are not being protected from the same thing. What's going after the same, whatever Reddit's doing and whatever their reasoning for doing is, where there is to go after folks who have made whole businesses, essentially maybe funneling some of their business out. It's also hitting these other things that are important for people's experience of Reddit. And that, I think, is really where folks should be disturbed by it, because the problem is you can say about the app, say, hey, Reddit has an app. And maybe it's not as good as the other app, but there is an app. Fine. But when you say, hey, the app or the browser experience doesn't have these accessibility features that folks might need, this other thing does. Now you're killing that other thing, or you're making it impossible for them to do it, or they're going to have to charge money. It's just making it a big quagmire that most of all these tools are just going to shut down. Well, you don't have that in your app. You are not providing these things that these folks, these accessibility features that people need. And that's the problem. I want to say the history, or one of the history subreddits, did probably the best job of laying out, hey, you may not care about Apollo or Reddit is Fun or one of those other apps, but these are things that you may not use, but you might care that other folks need them. And so they're doing some kind of blackout, I think in the next week, maybe, or the week after. I don't think even it's going to land on a Friday. So it's not theoretically going to impact what I do, but it is making me rethink whether I should rely on Reddit so much. I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens at the end of the month. But I thought I would bring it up because you might notice if you don't run Reddit very much and you go in, a lot of your Reddits or subreddits that you might go to, including some of the D&D OSR ones. I'm not sure what they're doing on those days, if they're participating or not. Some of it's up in the air and they're not there. That's why. And then if maybe in a couple of weeks or next month, and I'll probably revisit it then, if suddenly I'm not pulling as much stuff from Reddit or I'm not going on Reddit at all, that might be why. Because I think, you have to make your voice known, and I'm nothing in the scheme of things, but we do what we can. Which also leads me to, again, this week, much like last week, I didn't put out a call for things, but I'm going to be more and more looking to folks who participate in here or watch and listen to this to send me stuff. So that way that will help me. The more stuff you guys can send me, either it's your blog post or something you're working on, whatever, then the less I have to rely on something like Reddit, because I don't know where else to go. The one thing that Reddit is nice for is it does aggregate a bunch of stuff that there isn't a great aggregator for anymore. I can bounce to a whole bunch of blogs and see what's new. Maybe I can try to mash together a bunch of RSS feeds into something. Reddit was kind of nice because I could just go to have this multi-feed, or even just go into the OSR feed and just looking at it, and I could scan through and find stuff. And if that goes away, or if I decide to go away from it, I don't have another great method. And Discord doesn't do it. Discord doesn't really hack it. It's hard to find stuff in the ever-flowing feeds and so on and so forth. The way, whatever the channels in Discord, everything goes by. Hard to find a good thing. So I'm looking to you. I'm looking to you folks. Help me out. Let me just see what's going on in the chat here. Ian says all the good apps are screwed. Brian says, wait, is the problem that a company is charging for their service? Meh. Taryn says, Elon's $8 scam has poisoned the tech chief's brains. And then Brian Smith says, I guess Reddit is charging more at the risk of losing users and grading the user experience. Sounds like a risky move, but I have no dog in the race. Terrence says it's time to start bookmarking blogs. And then Brian Smith added that they did add an update to the mini golf game in the forum. I saw that, Brian. If we have time, we'll go to it. What I did do is actually went through and I had some stuff in my I use Pocket to kind of store articles. I had some stuff in my Pocket backlog. I thought we could go through. In terms of the Reddit thing, I mean, there's different angles to it. I think the important one is the accessibility stuff, and the sort of things like bots that are just doing helpful things that Reddit doesn't have alternatives for, yet they're gonna kind of, it's, they're throwing their, what's the term? They're throwing away the baby with the bathwater, right? Yes, there are probably some apps that are maybe don't they shouldn't have counted on a free API access because they're doing something commercial and blah blah blah. I get that, but then there's a lot of stuff that's just doing just good work for people and not charging anything for it. They're not stepping on Reddit's toes because Reddit doesn't provide the services that these things are provided, but Reddit's going to kill those too. We'll see how it turns out. It would have been nice if maybe they could figure out something. I don't know. And if I get it, it's hard from their endpoint too, because I'm sure all they see are just API calls, right? And they don't know what the good stuff is from the bad stuff. But that's just how it stands now. I thought I would just speak on it because today's the day where we usually at some point or another we're bouncing around into Reddit, and I might not today. And I'm gonna do more to try to decouple what we do from Reddit, just in case. All right, so this was posted. Well, this was posted on Reddit. A lot of this stuff I got on Reddit, which speaks to the problem for me on the decoupling front. From the Methods and Madness blog, there are two articles here. I believe I have both of them talking about weapons versus armor, which if you followed me at all or listen to other stuff, I'm a big fan of it in theory, weapon versus armor, but I haven't seen and I haven't figured out a system myself to bring it in without, to me anyway, feeling like it's adding a whole bunch more work. So there are two articles here. One I think is just historical. I haven't read either one of them. I think the other one, there's something new, but I figure we'll read the one that's more on the state of weapons versus armor from AD&D to BX, as it says right here. And then we can look at the second piece. This was posted on June 3rd. I will post this in the chat. Also, my laptop's running hot. My old laptop, when I'm remote like this, I'm counting on, because the other computer is a desktop and I cannot card it everywhere I go. So let me show this on screen. Here's the address. So I am hoping it doesn't overheat and then the stream go all wiggly. So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Okay. Weapon versus armor from AD&D to BX. As you might know, I'm into BX, using my own clone and also frequently using modules from other systems, but I have been reading lots of AD&D lately. In the last few days, I've been looking at the weapon versus armor table in AD&D. Now, according to Delta's blog, the weapon versus armor table in AD&D contains mathematical/revision errors. It is a simple lost in translation mistake. I've heard some good arguments saying that there is no error, i.e. the revision was done on purpose, but I think he makes a good point. Go read it and decide for yourself. Maybe we'll do that later. In any case, I also think there's cool stuff to learn from both chainmail and AD&D, and this is what matters to me. In chainmail, to hit someone in plate and shield, that's AC2 in AD&D, with a dagger, you'd need to roll a 12 using 2d6. For example, a two-handed sword would only require 7. I added the average column to compare the overall effectiveness of each weapon. Notice the green or blue means good chances of hitting. Red means bad. The spear is a bad weapon against armor on average. All right, so he had a little, I guess, a picture of an Excel table with this chart laid out. So you go from your armor class and then essentially what you need to hit, and then it goes from low armor class meaning bad to high armor class meaning good, even though high armor class is low, or low armor class meaning good, high armor class meaning bad. I guess I should say. I always think kind of in descending, but when I repeat it out to people, 9 is bad, 2 is good, just to be straight. Nosorian says weapon type versus armor is something great. I love it. I made a simplification because I don't understand the original table shenanigans. Aha. Well, maybe Methods and Madness will have us covered. If you calculate the chances of hitting with 2d6, you'll find that rolling 12 happens about 3% of the time, while rolling 7 or more happens about 60% of the time. This means the two-handed sword is 20 times better than a dagger against plate and shield. But if your target is unarmored, they are nearly identical. Likewise, the mace is about 5 times better than a regular sword against AC2, but the sword is a bit better against unarmored foes. Note that all weapons deal the same damage in chainmail. Now let's check the Greyhawk table. It might contain a translation error, but this doesn't matter for our purposes. There's no perfect way to convert from chainmail to D&D for various reasons. What we are doing here is looking at certain tendencies and making generalizations. E.g., maces are good at defeating heavy armor, daggers are terrible for that unless our target is prone. So then again, we have another table, this one from Greyhawk. And remember, Greyhawk was supplement 1 to the white box. It added in thieves, it added in variable weapon damage, a few things. These tables show that almost all weapons are good against unarmored and bad against plate and shield, i.e. armor is even more important than AC would indicate. On average, there's a 10-point spread between AC9 and AC2. On the other hand, most modifiers are positive, which means you're hitting more often against anything but plate. And then third, the biggest difference is against low ACs. In practice, because THACO and statistics, this means choosing the right weapon could double or triple your damage against heavy armor, but barely matters against unarmored foes. And finally, heavy and unbalanced weapons are good against heavy armor and just better overall. As you can see, this solves a number of issues with BX weapons. For example, the sword stops being simply the best weapon and faces some difficulty against heavy armor. The spear is in a similar situation. Long, good against charges, but bad against armor. Big weapons, such as the lance and two-handed sword, get a well-deserved boost. The hand axe is no longer simply cheaper and better than the mace. In addition, it makes wearing armor more relevant. This is also a much-deserved boost to plate armor, which is heavy and restrictive. Plate gives you great protection against a sword or dagger, maybe making you invulnerable, unless you're prone, see below. While this is much simpler and a bit more sensible than the AD&D table, it is still a bit fiddly for my tastes. Of course, to see the whole picture, we'd have to consider speed factor and space required, which is much worse. Also, we'd need to consider variable weapon damage, a popular rule in BX and basically every version of D&D. But maybe we can extrapolate some cool ideas from here. Let's see. The easiest way of simplifying this is just giving a bonus to hit to certain weapons, from 0 to +2 to avoid negatives. Instead of calculating it, we should judge on a case-by-case basis. Or we could get more detailed. Light, balanced weapons, dagger, hand axe, spear, short sword, club, have a hard time against heavy armor. Let's say -1 to hit against chainmail or better. Okay. And then we have a little bracketed aside. Wouldn't it be nice if these lighter weapons gave you a small bonus when backstabbing? Now the thief can still backstab with a heavy weapon. It's just not optimal. And chainmail also gives pointy weapons a bonus against prone targets and armor. Neat. Heavy or unbalanced weapons, two-handed with the slow tag, are more likely to cause damage, +1 regardless of armor. I used to ignore the slow tag, but maybe give it a -1 to initiative to put things back in the right place. Everything else is unchanged. I'm not particularly fond of small bonus against medium armor that some weapons get, and I don't quite agree with some of the conclusions, e.g. why is a two-handed sword so much better than a lance against armored opponents? This is a radical simplification that brings me back to an old idea of having a few weapon traits, brutal or unbalanced, fast or balanced, and everything else. Now, I have so many small problems with D&D weapons that if I were to recreate the list again, I'd probably start from scratch, or from 5e, at least the weights make sense. But it is fun to see that the original system makes a lot more sense once you actually take the time to understand it, which includes understanding what AD&D got wrong. Come to think of it, rewriting the entire thing is doable. Not sure if it's worth the effort. Let me know in the comments. All right, and then we have some notes. I'm going to pass over the notes. It goes over the 1E, 2E tables, and that stuff. I'm going to pass over that. Brian Smith says, man, this amount of number crunching is not my cup of tea. Well, the great thing is somebody else crunches the numbers, and then we can reap the benefits. And I need to take a sip. This is Polar Sparkling Orange Dry. I dropped my glasses. I bought some of these last time I was up here. They taste nice, but the problem is they're way too sweet. I don't know if it's just I didn't look at the ingredients. It can't just be juice. I can't see here. I got too much glare. Yeah, it's got corn syrup and blah, blah. It may have juice in it, but juice is not where that sweetness is coming from. Well, I will not be buying these again. Consider this if you just want sweet, it's good. But consider this a negative review in terms of healthier beverages for the Polar Real Juice line of dry beverages. All right, so here we go. AD&D weapon speed and armor piercing made easy. This is basically part 2 of what we just read. I'm going to drop it in the chat so you can see it. Oh, we got some. Hold on, and I'll hit the comments here real quick. Okay. Ian Borchardt says, my preferred approach is to apply the attribute to a specific weapon versus a specific armor class rather than AC. For example, axes get a bonus to damage versus opponents with shields. Instead of a specific weapon type, I just use damage types, piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning. Terrence says, I think it would be more welcome in a very low magic game. Maybe. And then Brian Smith says, I like the concept of all this granularity, but unless it's being crunched and served up to me by a machine or some other source in real time, they would take me out of the game so hard. Well, I think if you can get down to a simple enough level, you may be able to run it just as the GM. You got a sword, you're swinging it, you kind of do a little bit of math in your head. Yeah, sure, if you have it plugged into some kind of virtual, VTT, virtual tabletop, then that makes it even just kind of super easy. But even without that option, you might be able to get to a point where it flows fairly well in your head. I don't know, but I don't know if I feel like it has to be in a low magic system. I think it just has to be in a system that you're really gonna reward that. I think it's neat because you can think about with martial classes, they don't end up with a ton of choices in the game, moment to moment. They got whatever, they just have their weapon, which is the best weapon that they've got, and they just go to town with it, and that's okay. But I think this stuff allows them to have some specializations, allows them to think, not specializations isn't the right word, to have more tools in their toolbox, and maybe a reason to have a hireling around as a squire to come and cart them around for you, and then to kind of eyeball a situation and then pick the right tool for the job, or bring a tool that maybe wouldn't have been obvious to bring and yet might have this. Like, I think we're going to fight something, I don't know, with heavy armor, so I'm going to bring this mace and I'm going to leave this other thing at home because I don't think we're going to need it, right? You kind of get some more choices and interesting things, and then it also makes more weapons viable because they've got different things, which it just gives them more choices. Again, there's a couple of that it helps with that problem of, well, I've already got this longsword +2. Why do I need this great axe +1? It's just garbage. But if that great axe +1 has value because it's actually useful in some combats where your longsword +2 is going to be weaker, then suddenly you want to keep that great sword. Suddenly it has a reason to be in your kit, to potentially take up inventory space or your hireling's inventory space. Hey, Bonk. Brian Smith says, is it intended that the player would keep track of all of their weapon type when armor they're attacking, or is it the GM supposed to keep tabs on that? It's a good question. I mean, I wouldn't ask the player to keep track of all of it. I imagine the GM would keep track. Would know which weapons. Maybe the player would know the tags, but then the GM would kind of know, because it's not always going to be obvious what armor you're facing, especially if it's natural armor. And if you'll see, like, what is it? Maybe in your game, Dragon Scale is like chain, but the players might not know that, so you would know it, but the player would know that they've got weapon X. And so the tags, or maybe you could verify the player, hey, what tags does this weapon have? Oh, it's slow and it's piercing. Okay, you're against chainmail. That's good. Great. Bonk says, wanted to swing by and say that my interview with Yochai Gal pushed them to deep dive Karen. Now they're writing their first adventure, running their own games and joining groups online. Hope I'm doing well. Hey, thanks, Bonk. I'm glad. I'm glad that that was a gateway for you. That's awesome to hear. And I look forward to shoot me over your adventure. Let me know, link to it when it's all said and done. Love to see it. But that's awesome. And yeah, doing all right. Hanging in there. Okay, so here we go. Back to more distinct and more balanced and, well, much cooler. And speed factor. The first two are probably ignored as often as weapon versus armor, but are quite simple and easy to understand. Speed factor, however, is intertwined with the cryptic AD&D initiative rules. It ultimately means that you can attack first and more often with a fast weapon. The lower the speed factor, the quicker the weapon. Finally, certain weapons can dismount and disarm, and weapons deal different damage against large opponents. We will leave that for another time. Could we use this information for something cool in our BX games, or at least try to reduce it to BX levels of complexity? I think we can. First, take a look at the table. They added a color and average column for the weapon versus armor values, and repeated the speed column by its side to show something that should be more or less obvious. Speed in inversely proportional to hit bonuses. The blue-red colors almost never match in these columns. This means heavier, slower weapons hit more often, even if they attack less often. Okay, now you got a whole list of weapons here, from battle axe to rouge, and a breakdown of all their stuffs here. Great. And then here's the same table with some outliers eliminated, which means, I guess, removing fists, staves, clubs, and whatever the all pike is to increase contrast. So he just kind of removed some, I guess, outliers to make it a little bit more readable, but I'm not going to go through this whole table. So I want to see what's to be made of all this data. Now, speed is reduced to 1 to 10, and to hit bonuses are reduced to -3 to +3, it being the range. But the average for each weapon is just -1 to +2. I wouldn't want to check a table for every attack, nor use the AD&D initiative system in my games. But what if we had only one number per weapon, meaning both speed and strength against armor? They'd need to be inversely proportional. Here is my fix, and that is bolded and underlined. Terrence says, woof, that's a whole lot of chart. It is. When you roll a natural 20, you deal normal damage and roll again to see if your attack was a brutal hit. This was resolved as a regular attack, but with a bonus equal to your speed factor. Hit or miss, you can now make another attack, fast hit, against the same target or an adjacent foe. If the number on the d20 is greater than your speed factor, but with no bonus. I'm not sure I'm following this completely. The first part is, when you roll a natural 20, deal normal damage, and then roll again to see if it was brutal, and is resolved as a normal attack, but you get to add your speed factor as a bonus. All right, so that's fun. Now, is this next part still part of the crit or something else? I think maybe it's something else. Okay, so I think they are supposed to be separate. Maybe? Or is it just on crits? I don't know. Maybe it's supposed on crits. Yeah, I think they could have. I think maybe they could have. They could have organized this to make it clear that these are things that are both happening on a crit. So you can try to make a brutal hit, or you can try to make and you can try to make a fast hit. But presumably, your odds of making a brutal hit with a fast weapon are very low, and your odds of making a fast hit with a brutal weapon are also very low. So here we get, in practice, this means that someone using a heavy weapon deals double damage on a nat 20 very often, regardless of armor. On the other hand, quick weapons often get another attack, which is particularly deadly if you are unarmored. All right. So yeah, I think they're both on crits, and essentially it's brutal hits are going to do more damage. Fast hits are going to also do more damage, but you have that potential to actually target another foe. So you could do 2 quick flicks at one person, or you can go flick if you need to. So a fast hit can sort of mimic a brutal hit in a sense, potentially, but you could also spread it around if that's what you wanted to. I'm going to read the example, and then I see Brian Smith's comment there, but let me read the example first. Alina gets a natural 20 using a mace, which has that factor of 6. She rolls again with a +6 bonus, which makes a huge difference against heavy armor, potentially damaging the original target even further. And she gets a second attack if her roll is higher than 6. Hold on a minute. Alina gets a natural 20 using a mace. She rolls again with a +6. Okay. Further. Right. So you always get to try both. You always get to do the brutal hit, and you always get to do the fast hit. So she got a 20. So then she gets to roll, see if it's a brutal hit. And then regardless of whether that hit or ends up hitting or missing, but she's going to be +6. If she her second attack, if her roll is higher than 6, which is fairly often, she's going to get a second attack. Do we have I think we need to have to see what those SFs are. I feel like to get a sense for what's going on. So here's the second example. A lowly bandit attacks a knight in plate with a dagger. He gets a natural 20 and can roll again with a +2 bonus. And very likely attack again, no bonus. Still, his chances of hitting are very low. Had the target been unarmored, he would have had a decent chance of doubling or tripling the original damage. Okay. I feel like the sweet spot for weapons then, and I don't know if he's put together a list of the final factors here. It's going to be those middle spreads, because then you have a good chance of actually doing a whole bunch. It does. So what this seems to be doing is, on a crit, you're activating a bunch of different things. You could potentially hit really up to 3 times, 2 on one creature, and then 1 potentially on another creature, or the same one, which is interesting. I kind of dig that part. I don't know about the way he's necessarily getting here, but I suppose is once you have these charts and you have your mace, and you just have mace, it's got a factor of 6, attack damage of blah blah. Maybe that works okay. Let's see. All right. Let me see. So Brian Smith said, so a single attack would have to consider weapon type, armor attacking, size of opponent, speed of a weapon, and space to attack in, consulting multiple charts. for one attack. Well, in AD&D, it was all kind of on one chart, I think. I don't have my book in front of me to speak, but yes, if you played with everything, there, yeah, it was gritty. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I'm always a little bit askance when I hear people just flippantly say they played AD&D with all the rules, because it could get gritty, and especially it could get to be very crunchy, not gritty, very crunchy. And especially back in the day when we didn't have all the computers and everything to kind of manage and potentially hide a lot of that crunch for us, it was stuff that people were doing. I think a lot of people did. I'm sure there are probably some people, some minority who did manage to play with everything, maybe. And there was a lot more of us who played with some. And we'll use speed factor. We don't do anything else. We use reach, but we didn't use this. We use, size or whatever. Did it like, and that was kind of the thing. Everyone sort of picked and chose from the DMG and PHB which bits they wanted to play with. Terrence says, which buttons do you press to do a fatality or a friendship? Good question. Brian Smith says, I'm assuming making an attack and determining the outcome would be something that happens often in a game. I think the mechanic should be as simple and fast as possible. I think it should be. So I agree with you, Brian Smith. I'll say my caveat, or I would do it a little bit differently. I think whatever it gives back to the table in the experience should be worth whatever the slowdown is. If it's slower than the benefit, and this is why I've always struggled with, well, I'd love to do something with this, but what to do with it, because I've always felt like, and I'm not necessarily that I'm right or wrong, but I've always felt like it just takes too long for what it's doing, even though I really like ultimately what it's doing, which is why I've always wondered at some point or thought about, man, I'd love to go check out some of the VTTs that have something like AD&D in them, the rules and mechanics, so that we could potentially see how is it enjoyable, where you could just basically hit, go through your mechanics list, just, okay, all these things are checked on, but yet your experience of playing isn't really slowed down at all because it's all being factored in, basically. All right, whoops. All right, so now to finish this off, so we have some bullet points. Weapons are distinct in both speed and strength against armor. Every weapon can potentially have its own niche. A single digit is added to weapon stats. Even that single digit can be safely ignored 95% of the time because it's only on crits. You can assign any number to speed factor on the run, not only because the 1 to 10 skill is intuitive, but also because it is fair. Every number has its pros and cons. Crits are meaningful, but not enough to be too deadly. Doubling damage is rare if you're wearing armor, tripling it very unlikely, and memorable. So they get some tables, which kind of show everything breaks out. So the idea here is you're really adding one stat to your weapons, and you're getting. So I understand where he's coming from, and I haven't tested it, but I think he's kind of thinking along the lines I am. So you have one stat, and this stat gives you a bunch of different ways you can do this. I might almost think that maybe you choose either go brutal or fast and not get all three, just to not slow down. I mean, it's on crits, right? So yes, it's 5% of the time this thing's going to happen. Now, of course, depending on what kind of game you're playing, what kind of houses you're playing, if you have things that have extended crits, you'd have to determine whether something like this would happen on an extended type crit or not. And you could also, I'm going to also want to say, well, maybe fighters, just because they're higher to hits. I don't know. This is where I wonder, should this be something that only, say, fighters get, or fighter types, or something like that? But we get a bunch of tables. Great. I don't see where he has the SF values, though. Where are those SF values? Or maybe they're here. So what, is Dagger a 2? Where's Dagger? Okay, they are here on this table. I see. So a lot of the pole arms are at 10, which makes sense. All right, so the Dagger, SF2, has about 30% of a brutal hit against AC2 and a 14% chance of landing a fast hit. The chance of triple damage, assuming a new attack against the same target, is very low. I think less than 5%, but it isn't easy to calculate, since a successful roll increases both chances. But against AC10, the chances are 70% for a brutal hit and 52% for a fast hit. A two-handed sword has a 70% chance of a brutal hit against AC2, plus an 8% chance of a fast hit. Against unarmored foes, a brutal hit is certain, and a fast hit happens 30% of the time. The chance of dealing triple damage against unarmored foes is similar for both weapons. The exact numbers are not, for the most part, the exact numbers are not the most important part, of course. We're here for the fun. Swinging a huge weapon that crushes your enemies, even inside armor, or stabbing your unarmored foes repeatedly with a dagger. Of course, I want these to be multi-purpose mechanics. You can use the same number for all kinds of things. Initiative, backstabbing, maybe weapon size or length. Weapon size sounds better than speed factor, by the way, maybe leverage, but this is fine-tuning for now. Very happy with the general idea. Okay, so he's going to do another one that'll have a table that's ready to use. I think this is a good start. I like some of the things in here. I mean, actually, there's nothing really I don't like about it. I like the idea of having, one other stat. I'm wondering if it could even be done. I wonder if there's even a different way to do it. I don't know. Maybe there's even another way, but I'd have to think about it. Whoops. But given that this is something that I've always felt would be a neat little bit to have, then you could. Now, the thing is with this system, right, to go to Brian Smith's point, you don't have to track a bunch of stuff. This is just, it's manipulating the stuff that's coming up in combat anyway. You have your armor class, and then this just only happens on your 5% of the time, right? Your natural 20s. And then essentially you're just making extra rolls using that same modifier. You don't have to worry about A versus B or, what kind of weapon is this and what kind of armor is that. It's just these things. Now, some of that does detract from what I loved about the original tables, which was it's not just about the class of the armor. It's kind of like what kind of armor you're wearing. Now, a lot of times that's often historically, right? You have like your plate style armor, you have your chain style armor. And so slicing weapons, not that effective against chain. Stabbing weapons, more effective against chain. Crushing weapons, great against plate mail, maybe less than chain for whatever, right? And you lose a little bit of that because you don't get that, which I like in the fiction sense of, I have a mace. Going on against a guy in plate, I have a mace. This other guy maybe has some magic chainmail on. My mace is going to be less effective against that. So then for that guy, I should bring out my big stabby sword. And this other thing's coming, so I should go get an axe because he's got a big shield or something. And you do lose that, which is maybe my big issue with it's in which is always the case when you're taking these very detailed numbers and you're trying to pull back out. It's like, just you lose something when you get the distance. And that part's missing because I want, in my ideal situation, I want my player to size somebody up and say, okay, this is great for this thing. And this is not great. That you have that situational, I guess, weapon use. This, to me, is not going to bring you situational weapon use. Someone's just going to have more. They're going to have more things to look at. It will probably spread out which weapons players take, which is good from the standpoint of there's more reasons because let's say maybe you want, like I said, it feels like the sweet spot is maybe those weapons that are in that like 5 range, 6. So then you're looking at things like flails and what's a sword? Like your long sword's a 5. All right. Broadsword, right. 5. Okay, great. And maybe you want a little bit. So maybe you say, this scimitar. Maybe this other one. It's funny that the longsword's at them in the middle, which I feel like is where the sweet spot is. So maybe it wouldn't actually change what the vast majority of players would pick anyway, but it definitely lets you think about, I really want to get brutal hits all the time. I'll take that 2-hander, or maybe I can, but it also means that, maybe I can hedge my bets a little bit and take a spetum or maybe not a lance is not a good, or a glaive. Yes, for the glaive or something else, or maybe even that flail or a military fork. I can still do pretty well with the brutal, but I get a little bit more of that fast, that quick, fast attack. But hey, you can't have everything. You cannot have everything. Soren says, that's the interesting part. It always adds variety. It also adds variety. It adds power to the fighter who can use all kinds of weapons. Ian says, I think I'll stick with streamlined weapon properties. And then Historian says, it's a nice idea to have only one weapon value besides damage, but I'm not buying it yet. Well, look, it's a good attempt. I'm glad somebody is looking at it and trying. And it may not be the solution that ends up working. There may not be one until we're able to really fine tune VTTs or even have something we can have at the table and everybody, and then we can make it really easy to plug something in and spit out a value. But, I appreciate the attempt. This is a bit small, so I'm just bumping up the size. How's that? This one's called Wind in the Dungeon. I will link to it. It's on the Wandering Gamist blog spot. Let me post this in the chat. Just waiting. There we go. I'll show it on the stream for a second. You can pause it if you want to go there. I'll try to put all these in the show notes after all is said and done. This is from June 5th. Wind in the Dungeon. It's been windy here lately. I don't really have air conditioning, but I do have windows on both the east and west sides of my apartment. When the wind is out of the east or west, I can get great cooling by opening both sides. When the wind is out of the north or south, cooling my apartment becomes very difficult. It has got me thinking about the old dungeon winds that would extinguish torches and were good reasons for a protected lantern. I've been wondering, were the old dungeon winds random, or did they arise from features that players might predict from the presence of airflow? If one wanted to explain dungeon winds or just moving air at all, how might one do it? It's a good question. An opening near the surface might admit a draft of fresh air. A pair of dungeon entrances at different elevations could produce a regular flow with both an influx and an outflux, like prairie dog burrows do. A big persistent fire in the dungeon might have an indraft and an outflow. A tidal dungeon, where sections fill or empty with water, would have airflows associated with that. The breathing of an enormous beast could produce regular periodic airflows. A deep, cold underworld might have inflows where air in the upper levels cools and sinks. You might be able to tell which doors are open or closed based on airflows. You can sure tell whether my windows are open or closed based on them. Monsters might also be able to tell the direction of drafts where things have changed in their environment. There are, of course, plenty of other interesting features to air besides motion, temperature, humidity, smell, and composition, and all of these could signal features too. I think the big problem with some of this is all good stuff. It's good stuff to think about. The problem is that our apartments, generally speaking, are a lot simpler than prairie dog burrows or dungeons. So yes, if you have an apartment and you have 5 windows, it's all pretty evident where the windows are. And even then, though, if I walked in this person's apartment, I'd probably need to know about this north, south, east, west air thing to really get a sense of what's going on, which is fine if I'm a denizen. As a visitor, which an adventure is, it's not. I'd have to kind of have it all scouted before I might be able to say, aha, here's where the air is coming from. The other thing is that our apartments tend to be very simple. Even a relatively complicated, and I'm just going to use a 1-floor apartment here, doesn't have that many rooms to it. There's not that much going on. You have a sense of where the outer things are and whatever. Whereas a dungeon can have tons of rooms, and if you're off in some wing corner of the dungeon, I don't think you'd be able to tell much from some anonymous, like a door slamming, or if a monster could tell. Maybe a monster could tell if they're aware of the breeze and it suddenly shifts. That might tell them something. But there's also other creatures moving around the dungeon. So how much could they really tell? I don't know. It's a neat idea, and I think it's something to think about. But I don't know how much practical stuff is going to get. If you have a big dungeon, if you're in a small dungeon, maybe this is more interesting. But I think you can think about what sorts of things. Like, I like the concept of thinking about fires in the dungeons or different levels, and maybe how they're connected and how that works. Neat to think about. I don't know if there's too much practical stuff there. Terrence says dungeon winds come from all those beans adventure scene on the road. Well, that would make it very flammable for that fire in the dungeon, for sure. Okay. Moving on. This one's at the Night at the Opera. Night, Knight. I'm going to post this. There's the link. Another blog spot. Gosh, why do I always have small print? Oops. Nope. Long bouton. This one. Okay. People are problems, NPCs as challenge elements. Before we get started, I swear I'm not a sociopath. I don't think of NPCs in the same way that most other GMs do. If you're new to the hobby, you'll find no shortage of tips and tricks on how to make amazing NPCs. And for many GMs, a well crafted NPC is literally their favorite part of the game. And then he links to an article by DM David called How to Create Lovable Non Player Characters, which, in my experience, is very typical of the sorts of advice you commonly see. He advocates that your NPC should be distinctive, be flawed, be relatable, be useful, be authentic and vulnerable, struggle, ask for help, show warmth, show admiration, be entertaining, and be optimistic. That sounds nice and all, but it is not how I roll. If I happen to make an NPC memorable, believable, three-dimensional, and beloved by the players, then that's a happy accident I'll gladly accept, but my goals are a bit different. To me, an NPC is essentially the same thing as a trap, puzzle, monster, or magic item. They are simply another asset in my toolbox for crafting obstacles and opportunities to challenge my players. The reason it's hard to think of them through that lens is because, well, for one thing, they're people, but also because they are the most flexible and potent tool for crafting challenges. So all-encompassing in their possible design purposes that it's hard to make any generalizations about them. But today, I'll share a few things I know. All right, so this is pretty long, so let me take a drink here. Caveats. I need to be clear about something before we begin. I'm not advocating for this approach. I'm merely describing it. I already know and understand that this will be extremely unappealing to most people. I just want to share how I personally do things. In fact, I actually polled some of my players while writing this post. I can confirm that, generally speaking, they have a hard time remembering any specific NPCs, and are even less likely to remember names. So if that's a deal breaker for you, then feel free to walk. But I did confirm my suspicion. It was pretty easy for them to remember the events and activities that those NPCs provided. Here's a quote. I remember this time we did an interrogation scene. I remember that we whipped those bullies' asses. I remember that we recruited the starving goblins as followers and made them go into every room first to set off traps. It's not like I've never been down that road before. I've tried to make memorable PCs. I've tried to get their names and personalities to stick and have naturalistic, vivid, and colorful extended in-character dialogue with my players. It's just never made an impact. I'm probably bad at it, but this approach, it seems to stick pretty well. Objectification. The key to understanding this approach is to objectify your NPCs. Whoa there, you don't have to be a perv about it, you freak. Here's what I mean. First, titles are better than names. I used to prepare a title, give a name and surname for every NPC at minimum. It can't hurt to have one prepared, I thought. Nah, it's just a waste of time and creative energy. The best name a character can have is the shopkeeper, the landlord, the nun. The player will naturally be doing this on their own anyway. What did the magistrate tell us to do again? Second, assets, liabilities, and social resources. This answers the question, what is there to exploit here? This is the meat and potatoes of any NPC I make. It's endlessly flexible. An NPC could have knowledge, access, special skills, wealth, whatever. Hell, they could just be violent. But don't forget the weaknesses. Maybe they're a coward, or stupid, or angry, or addicted, or greedy, or whatever. Some NPCs have both good and bad traits, but it's not always obvious. For example, you might have some idiot jerk NPC who needs rescuing. Why would the players do that? Because his asset is that he is, quote, the king's son. Even characters who seem entirely awful can still have value by proxy. Third, wants and does not wants. This answers the question, how do we exploit this person? There's tons of ways to do this. A goal is more concrete than a motivation, but also interesting are instincts, or in Dungeon World terms, an impulse. Terrible name, just awful. As well as loyalties. The type of loyalty I play with the most is factional or political loyalty, like member of the Federalist Party, or serves House Lannister, or supports Parliament over the throne, or the courts, or the church. But there's also a character archetype I love in media that's really gameable. Super loyal henchmen. Like their whole motivation is just, I'm loyal to this other character, with no explanation. Samwise Gamgee in Lord of the Rings, Gonza in Princess Mononoke, Amos in The Expanse. There's a temptation to reveal some reason for this, but I find it so much funnier and more interesting when you learn, actually, no, they aren't secretly in love with them at all. They're not family. They don't owe them anything. They're not gullible or being taken advantage of. They are just super loyal to them. They're basically a dog. Fourth, minimalize dialogue. In-character dialogue works against objectification. Other GMs often advise that you keep an eye out for every potential opportunity to do more social roleplay in order to enhance your game. Like when players are shopping or resting, or I don't know, just trying to walk through a building where adventure isn't even supposed to be happening. I'm the exact opposite. I often try to keep the NPC talking parts to a minimum, even abstracting them away into mechanics when possible. Partly this is because I'm not super comfortable doing it, but partly it's because I can subtly keep the game focused on activity instead of dilly-dallying. Don't get me wrong, sometimes you can have a ton of fun during the parts where the action is on pause and everyone is just waffling. But I found that players generally have more fun when things are happening, and they can reliably find plenty of opportunities to be goofy and roleplay along the way. If the point of resting mechanics is to give PCs a chance to refresh resources, then I prefer it to serve that purpose without obstruction. Making them put on a voice and have a conversation with an innkeeper only serves to place the focus on the part of the experience I don't find interesting. This logic applies to all sorts of things. I learned an important lesson long ago. If the game you're running is dependent on players seeking out rumors to kickstart an adventure, then just give players the rumors automatically. Don't wait for the players to ask for them. Don't assume that the players will seek them out, and don't throw them into a tavern with a bunch of colorful NPCs and expect the players to tease out the rumors through natural conversation in character. Just give them the damn rumors. Just say, while enjoying your drinks, you overhear insert summary. Or, during your rest at this inn, another traveler passing through mentions basic gist. Or, while doing your shopping in the market, you heard about just the part that would have caught the PC's interest. Any other details should fit on 1 or 2 lines. Finally, when all of that isn't enough, when you just need to bring an imaginary person to life, I couldn't emphasize enough the value of keeping it short and sweet and colorful. Lots of RPGs and blog posts have random tables of quirks and traits and whatnot to roll on. If you're that kind of person, I'm more of a answer some basic questions kind of creative thinker. My favorite blog post from this is from Amanda P., who I think shows a better intuition for the most valuable kinds of details to have an answer for than any other resource I've seen. There is a basic assumption underlying these. In my experience, players who have big hearts and a capacity for loving NPCs are reliably able to do that on their own. This explains the often joked about phenomenon of the goblin mascot. DMs the world over are constantly bewildered when their players adopt some random goblin as their favorite NPC. Why would they do this when that was just a nameless mook you didn't flesh out at all, meant only to be killed? The answer is that those players have big hearts and want to love NPCs, whether you are trying to get them to or not. Thus, I found that putting effort into trying to make NPCs lovable is just redundant. Better to instead put my effort into making NPCs that the ruthless pragmatists of the party can still find a reason to care about and protect. Failing that, it also gives all players a bit of guidance on how to interact with this game element. Real-life humans are nuanced and complicated and hard to pin down. They're people, and some players are a bit paralyzed when it comes to interacting with people. But a game element that can be fully described as 1, clearly descriptive title, 2, assets, 3, liabilities, 4, wants, and 5, does not want is, well, it makes things just a little more approachable for a lot of folks. We'll take a little pause here. Brian Smith says, probably depends on the party. We did a few entire sessions that took place entirely in a tavern full of NPCs and info gathering mingling. I mean, yeah, Brian, it's one of those things I feel like we don't need to say because I think it should be self-evident or evident. It's always going to depend on the type of party, right? And I don't know that this person is necessarily saying, like, no, you can't do that thing, but they're not going to put the focus on it. Like, I think, like in all situations, we may prepare for our party to do X and Y, and they do Z instead, and you just roll with it. But at the same time, I'm sure in this person's game, they probably had sessions where their players just ended up in the tavern. But he's not creating necessarily the colorful NPCs so much as giving them these other things, and then maybe they get color as they go along, or the players themselves just give them color, which will happen also, right? Where you have somebody just a shopkeeper with a note that they're gruff and that they hate the mayor, and then that info comes up, and suddenly that character in the player's mind is become much more larger than life, or much more fleshed out, or somehow more important, when the reality was no, it was just gruff shopkeeper who hates authority. Brian Smith also says, I don't think you need to make your NPCs all lovable, though, as the OP says. Try to make them like a sampler platter. Well, I think he's just talking about advice that he's read. I think that there is a lot of advice on NPCs. I have to say, I don't see that. I haven't seen it where someone, or I haven't read a bunch of it, but I haven't read any when I've seen Reddit threads and similar say they have to be lovable. I come on the fact for sure that I feel like the main point for me is they need to be, if you want your party, and I did a video about this ages ago, if you want your party to care about your NPCs, they have to have some kind of usefulness. Like he was saying, they have to be an asset of some kind. And I think that's where a lot of folks, what they don't do. And I think a lot of folks also tend not to do the sampler platter. I remember I played in some games where just everybody was gruff. Everybody was the gruff innkeeper, but is everybody going town? And it was, oh, what do you want? I hate strangers. And then you go to the adventure shop. What do you want? I hate strangers. And then you go to the local temple. What do you want? I hate strangers. Praise Palor, kind of thing. And it just gets old. And then when the goblins attack and they're coming back to you saying, oh, save us, save our town, please save us. And you're like, you guys all were jerks. Why do I want to save you? People were terrible to us. We wanted to buy things. We wanted to spend our coin in your establishments, and you crapped on us, and now you want us to save us. Now you want to save us to save you. All right, so they just tried to have a mix of personalities in our campaigns. Whatever mood the players are in, they'll gravitate to one of the personalities over the other. Yeah, it's a good choice. All right, some of the favorite tricks. 1, factions. Duh. Maybe I'll skip some. So we talk about these tricks: having factions, having cliques, having followers, links to Prismatic Wasteland and Errant, contacts. I do like the I know a guy type thing. I don't have a great way of working them, but I do like it. Quest NPCs, the information giver. These are almost what would I say, like archetypes. Someone to protect, family, and then some bonus guidelines on names. I'll read this part. If a name is necessary, either make it short and simple or at the very least alliterative. I prefer real life names over fancy names, and I aim for names my players find fun to say. That rules out all the Fulumondaths, but also rules out Aidens and Reeds. Those aren't punchy enough. The NPC names that I've caught my players actually remember are names like Bert, Pete, Louise, and Randy, and Luna. In my Halloween adventures, there's a clique of recurring NPCs who are a trio of mean horse girls. Their names are Sandra, Hannah, and Barbara. Guess which one is always signaled out as the point of focus by every group of players? Barbara. It's just a better name. All right. I think there's some good things in here. I don't necessarily wouldn't do everything. I like to have them have names because I don't want them to seem just objects to the players, which I feel like, maybe I'd be wrong, but I feel like if just every town was the shopkeeper. And I think the thing is like the first time you go into a tavern, I would just say the tavern keeper. I would only come up with a name if the party actually went and said, well, what's your name? And it's like, oh, okay, here's his name, right? That's the other thing. I will attempt to not front load all the work on NPCs, much like everything else. You go to the tavern, yeah, tavern keeper. And then they get to know the tavern keeper. And now maybe I'll roll up in the moment on their reaction. I'll roll up a reaction. Okay, they're gruff. They're nice. They're smiling. They're whatever. Okay, great. And then the parties or regulars have to come back and they ask the guy, what's your name? Oh, okay. Now he's tavern keeper Frulum. All right, great. And then, so, tease it out, but that allows you to not have to, if you're creating, a settlement to start and you don't have to create everything at once. You can just say shopkeeper, tavern keeper, sheriff, lord, whatever, and then priest, and then you can just fill in just what you need to start, and then you can just kind of fill in it over time. But I do like that this is a counterpoint to a lot of the stuff you read about creating these NPCs. I mean, there's I guess overall there's just a big focus on a lot of people. A lot of people really strive for the social role play, and they don't feel like their games are running or are successful if their players aren't gathering together to just have role play haha sessions. But I mean, I'm going to be honest, I don't want to do that, really. Maybe if I really get into a game down the line, something will come up, but I don't strive to come in and just do that. Yeah, I mean, I agree to their point of do stuff. I want to do stuff. I want to be out doing stuff. Once I'm involved in doing stuff and I feel like I am doing stuff, then that opens up the social bit, because once I've got my sense of where I fit in the world and I have goals and I have things that I want, and then sometimes those things that I want, I'm not going to be able to accomplish them all by going into dungeons. I might need to go ask a local lord to, I don't know, I want to move up, say one of my goals is I want to become wanted the nobility. I want to get landed. I want to get knighted. Then I'm going to have to deal with a local lord. So then when we get to the local lord and audience with them that I can get, then that's a social encounter I'm going to be into because it's leading. It's part of the activity. But if it's just going to be, oh, you're in the tavern, haha, do you want to spend the next hour just chit-chatting? No, I don't, honestly. Unless, like I said, unless I'm really in the zone. But that's going to be few and far between and probably certainly not going to happen off the bat. Terrence says they like role-playing when it's moving the adventuring forward. Yep, I would agree with that. And then Brian Smith says, for me, being able to have a more social heavy session was a good counterpoint to super combat heavy sessions. I mean, it is nice to have it's nice to have balance, but I at least me as a GM, I don't try to plan it out that way. I don't go to have a combat heavy session. If it happens, it happens. And then by the flip side, I'm not going to go to have a social heavy session. If it happens, it happens. Right. And because I play very sort of open sandboxy, hey, players, what do you want to do today? It's kind of up to the players what they're going to do. So if they end up in a situation where they're going into back-to-back combats, that's kind of on them because they're sort of choosing to do that. And if they want to go hang out and just chat people up, that's sort of on them to do it. I don't find myself trying to be like the director in that sense of trying to, oh, we did this and now I got to do this other pillar. I want to make all the pillars available and I want to make all the pillars have equal opportunities to do stuff. So I'm not going to force you in one. I'm not going to force you in the other. I'm going to let you do. Greeno Girl asks, how am I? I am fine. Greeno Girl, hope you were fine too. And then Ian says, sometimes you just got to have a shopping episode. Indeed. All right. Well, we're at the hour and I didn't even get to through my list. Well, I will leave these. I will try to remember which ones are here so we come to them the next time. As I mentioned, we'll see what's going to happen with Reddit in the next few weeks. I mean, Reddit's not going to implode. You always got to give. What is it? What does he have to take with a grain of salt? All the people who are declaring they're going to be quitting Reddit because Apollo or these other apps are turned off. Like I said, I'm more concerned about the accessibility pieces and a lot of the very helpful tools people have made that are all going to be turned off and how much poorer that will make the Reddit experience for everybody. We'll see. But to the extent that I can get away from relying on Reddit to find articles and stuff, the better. So again, just to wrap this all up, I am imploring you, send me your stuff, whether it's yours or something you've read, you found, you saw it on a Discord that you're on and it seemed interesting, something you came up with yourself, something somebody passed you in the street, handed you a flyer, something you saw in a tweet or on whatever they call the things on Mastodon that's essentially a tweet, or if it's on Reddit or wherever it is, send it to me. I definitely, if you have stuff that you made yourself, like Brian Smith's mini golf game that's on the forums right now that I'll read later today, forums.hexed.press, I want to see it. And that way I won't have to rely on a single source for all our stuff. So that is my final imploration. I don't know what you would call it. My final exhortation. Brian Smith says that his crew went through hell for a few sessions in a row, so they got the chance to do some karaoke, gamble, rob people, and ultimately get one of their guys kidnapped. Well, sounds like fun was had by all. Well, on that note, folks, if you give a thumbs up on your way out, that would be awesome. If you found yourself in here and you're not subscribed to the channel and you feel like subscribing, that would also be awesome. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week or your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody. And I will talk to you later. Bye now.